Hey guys, we're back talking about the 2012 GTI. Just a reminder, what happened here is this vehicle got oil starved, and we had two sets of connecting rod bearings spin on us, basically scored up the crankshaft. That's where we are right now. That's where we left everything. We're basically in that repair process. So that's where we are here with the motor behind you, Rob, is basically our layout of how we're going to rebuild this top end. It's going to go through why we use what we use and where we get it from. Most of the stuff we have here is from Integrated Engineering out of Utah. That's who we use in all of our Volkswagen and Audi builds. Whether it's a performance job or just a simple rebuild, we're in the process of using products that are better than what came on the vehicle to begin with. I'm going to start basically by talking about the crankshaft we're going to use. The previous crankshaft got scored in many different ways, was just not something that we felt comfortable using. We were able to source it. We got this crankshaft here out of California, I believe. Just for some context into what we dealt with when the bearing spun, these are the new rod bearings here. If you look at these two, primarily this one, the difference between these two, the bottom connecting rod bearing, it got flattened against the actual crankshaft. And that is what damaged the crankshaft beyond the ability to actually use it. Basically, when this happens, it also scores up and has a tendency to make the connecting rods themselves unusable. We went to Integrated Engineering, and we're using their drop-in connecting rods on this GTI. The reason we're using those, we're not really building this vehicle for more power than it had from the factory. We're just simply building it for more longevity and durability. The things that make these connecting rods basically a different design, stronger than what came in the car. The H-beam design of these components, and basically that talks about the actual channels on the side of the rods themselves. The material that they use to build these connecting rods it's a process called two-piece 4340 forging. It just makes for a more durable, long-lasting connecting rod. The other thing to notice, if you look at the connecting rod bolts at the bottom, these are ARP 2000 bolts, and I think it's really important that you use a strong connecting rod bolt. These things get very, very hot, and when you use these, having a strong, durable connecting rod bolt is vitally important. There's not a lot of companies that make better versions of drop-ins. Usually, if you want a better connecting rod, you're buying a connecting rod that's to a different spec, which basically means not only do you have to replace a connecting rod, but you have to get certain things machined, and you have to basically take it to a significantly larger level for just replacing these. The great news is these are built to the exact same spec in terms of size, and they can be used in the application. Just literally drop them in just the way the old ones came out. I want to talk about the bearings for a minute. If you notice, just in their structure, they're different. So a couple of things that make them different, and these are Mahle Motorsport rod bearings. They're built and designed in the UK. One of the first things you'll notice is there's an oiling hole in the new one. There's not one in the old one. What you want out of a build, if you want to make the factory build better, providing oil is always the best way to do it when you're talking about connecting rods, wrist pins, things like that. One of the things that causes the wrist pins to fail in the factory applications is when it can't get constant oil flow. They get very, very hot. When they get very, very hot, they do this. And obviously that's not what you want, especially wrapped around your crankshaft. Other thing that I think is vitally important to pay attention to, you wouldn't see them if they were on this to begin with, but if you look at the laser etching in the bearings right there, a lot of etching that's done on rod bearings still to this day is they actually etch them. It's a manual process, so you're actually making the etching a lower surface point than the rest of the bearing. When that happens, you can create different heat levels over different sides of the bearing. When you do a laser etching, you're primarily in a position where you're just brushing the surface of it. You're not changing the surface level. So you're not getting different heat points at different areas of bearing. When you're dealing with the Volkswagen and Audi motors, especially when you're dealing with ones that have some miles on them, this vehicle had just under 100K on it, oil burning is a real thing on these motors. As they age, the piston rings have a tendency to shrink, they have a tendency to get out of place. When that happens, you can get oil basically past those rings. and that's never something you want because obviously the vehicle cannot use the oil that slips past the ring. So one of the things we do anytime we pull out the actual pistons, which we will here because we're replacing the connecting rods, it's, in my opinion, vitally important to go ahead and get these kits for replacing the piston rings. Now, these came from Schmidt, who built the original ones, and if we were going for more power, we would have obviously updated these, but because we're not, replacing the factory components basically gives you that snug fit back. We're obviously going to score up the cylinder walls a little bit, create a really, really nice attachment point for the new piston rings and the actual cylinders. You really want the ability for those rings to sit in nicely when they go back in the cylinders, because you want them to marry to each other. You don't want any oil to slip by. You don't want everything being too smooth. Obviously, you don't want it too rough. This is basically the other end of everything we're looking at. If you look right here, these are the original connecting rods that we're going to be replacing. Slightly different. You'll be able to tell more once they're out. That's an oiler. It basically provides oil directly to the bottom of the piston rings, to the pistons themselves. These are the factory bearings right here that are basically lined in. And what we're looking at here on top right there, that's the bottom side of the piston head itself. So basically the piston rings that I was talking about go in between the interior exterior of that hole and the actual bottom of the piston. The nice thing about Volkswagens is you have a really easy ability to clean up these blocks. So basically when we put the cylinder head back on, this is going to be completely smoothed out to spec. So that way when it sits back on, we don't have to worry about much anything. Everything fits smooth. Super important because, I mean, this is basically where everything happens inside the motor. You want it about as perfect as you can get it.